My name is Quinn Harper. I am 69 years old, a retired nurse who spent 35 years tending to strangers with steady hands and a quiet heart. I never imagined that the greatest shock of my life would arrive not in a hospital room, but in my own backyard under the soft morning light that used to calm me. 3 days after my daughter Nora told me she had put down Mercy, the last gift my late husband Elias left me for my own safety, I saw that same dog standing in the garden as if she had clawed her way back from the edge of the world. Her coat was dirty, her paws trembling, yet she dug with a frantic purpose that made my chest tighten. The memorial garden Nora and her husband Mason built for Elias had always felt too polished, too controlled, too carefully arranged. But that morning it looked like a crime scene wrapped in roses. I stood there frozen while Mercy tore at the soil with her wounded paws. When the earth gave way beneath her and the metal corner of a buried box glinted in the sun, a cold certainty settled in my bones. Something was hidden here, something Mason never meant for any of us to find. And the moment I pulled that box free, I felt the quiet life I had been holding together begin to split open. I did not yet know why my daughter had lied about Mercy. I did not know why she had looked away when I asked for the collar, or why Mason had insisted on handling every detail himself. I only knew that Mercy had come back to lead me to the truth that had been buried under my feet. The truth my husband must have sensed before he died. The truth my daughter could no longer shield me from. And the truth that would force me to confront the silence I had wrapped around myself for years. As I stood there with the box pressed against my chest, the air felt heavier than the heat that hovered over the yard. I could sense the weight of something unfinished, something Elias had tried to warn me about in his last month when he asked me to trust my instincts even when they made no sense. Mercy circled me with a whine, nudging my leg as if urging me to take the next step. At that moment, I realized that this was not only about secrets in a garden. It was about the years I had spent silencing myself to keep the peace, even when that peace was false. If this beginning pulls at you, tap like and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Your support helps keep these quiet voices heard. When Nora stood in my living room that morning, she would not meet my eyes. Her hands trembled the way they used to when she was a child who had broken something precious. But this time, it was not a vase or a picture frame she came to confess about. It was Mercy. She cleared her throat and said the words so calmly that my mind needed several seconds to accept them. She said the vet had been forced to put Mercy down for my safety because the dog had lunged at Mason the night before. Her exact words were, "For your safety, Mom, I had no choice." I remember feeling as if the floor shifted under me, yet I managed to nod, as if agreeing to a reality I could not understand. I had lost my husband, Elias, only 9 months earlier. The silence he left behind still filled every doorway, every corner of the house. Losing Mercy felt like losing the last breath of him. That dog was the last gift he placed in my hands when his voice was too weak to say much else. I remember him whispering that she would keep me company, keep me steady, keep me safe when he no longer could. When Nora told me Mercy was gone, it felt as if someone had erased the little warmth left in the rooms of my home. I thanked her for handling it because I could not trust my own voice, and Nora rushed out as if she was afraid I would ask too many questions. That evening, the house felt impossibly large. I walked past Elias's old recliner and traced my fingers along the worn armrest, remembering the faint sound of his breathing as he slept through the last weeks. He used to tell me that I cared too much for others and too little for myself. His words echoed through the empty hallway as I tried to accept that Mercy was gone. But something in me resisted fully believing it, as if the silence felt wrong, out of tune with the truth. 3 days passed. Then everything I believed to be real snapped in half. It was early morning, and the sun was brushing a soft gold across the yard when I saw movement near the fence. At first I thought it was a stray. My eyes are not as sharp as they used to be, but I knew the shape of that body, the slight limp in the front paw, the rhythm of her tail. It was Mercy, standing in my backyard, breathing, dirty, thin, scratched up, but alive. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened the back door, expecting her to come running like she always did. Instead, she sprinted straight past me toward the memorial garden that Nora and Mason had built for Elias just a few weeks earlier. That garden had never felt right to me. Too perfect, too designed, too deliberately placed. Mason had been proud of it, proudly explaining each brick, each stone, each layer of soil as if he understood something about my husband that I never would. But now, Mercy was clawing into that same ground as if her life depended on it. I hurried after her, calling her name, afraid she might collapse from exhaustion. She ignored everything except the patch of earth near the rosebush Mason planted himself. Her paws moved with frantic desperation, throwing dirt everywhere. And then I saw it, a small glint of metal beneath the surface, a corner of something hidden deep. A chill slid down my spine. I stood there, one hand pressed to my chest, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Mercy had not come back randomly. She had come back with a purpose. She was digging where Mason had worked for hours, insisting no one help him or watch him. Questions burned through me. Why had Nora lied? Why did Mason insist the dog was dangerous? What exactly was buried under the garden he built on his own? When I finally stepped closer, Mercy paused long enough to look at me with those dark, knowing eyes Elias used to say were wiser than most people. And at that moment, a thought formed in my mind so sharp that it almost hurt to think about it. My daughter was hiding something from me, and Mason was hiding something from all of us. For the first time in many months, I felt a spark inside my chest. Not anger, not fear, something steadier, a sense that the silence surrounding me was not actually peaceful. It was warning me, pushing me to see what I had refused to confront. Not every silence is peace. Some silences are alarms ringing quietly, and I knew then that whatever Mercy had uncovered in that soil would change everything I thought I knew about the people I loved. After Mercy clawed her way back into my life and exposed that sliver of metal beneath the memorial garden, sleep no longer came easily. The house felt heavier, as if the walls had absorbed my unease. In moments like that, my mind always drifted back to the hospital where I spent the final 7 weeks of Elias's life. Those days were slow and tender, in a way that only the end of life can be. I sat beside him through the long nights when the machines hummed steadily and the nurses moved quietly in the hall. He would squeeze my hand whenever his pain eased enough to be present with me, and sometimes he asked me to hand him the same handkerchief he carried for decades. It was a soft white cotton piece embroidered with his initials E.H., a gift from his mother when he was young. Even when his lungs weakened and his voice was barely a whisper, he always wanted that handkerchief folded in his palm. After he passed, I kept it in the top drawer of my nightstand. I still touch it every morning before getting out of bed, like a small ritual reminding me of the steadiness he brought into my life. Our home changed after he was gone. Silence settled in like a permanent guest, and every shadow along the hallway looked unfamiliar. I learned to move slowly, to make peace with the creaking floorboards and the long evenings without his gentle laughter. Some days I walked through the house with purpose, doing chores the way I always had. Other days I drifted through like someone searching for something she had lost but could not quite name. Nora visited more often in those first months. She came with bags and boxes, insisting she wanted to help me reorganize the house so I would feel lighter. I appreciated the intention until I noticed that nothing she touched ended up where I wanted it. Bookshelves I had arranged for years were suddenly rearranged into color-coded sections because Mason liked a modern look. Picture frames were moved from eye level to higher shelves because Mason said the house felt too cluttered. Even the kitchen drawers were reorganized in ways that confused me. Whenever I gently questioned a change, Nora would smile a tight smile and say that Mason thought it would help me keep things in order. She said it kindly, but something in the way she repeated his name made my stomach twist. One afternoon, while Nora was sorting through a stack of Elias's old medical bills, Clyde stopped by with a basket of lemons from his yard. Clyde had been our neighbor for over 20 years, a widower with a warm but quiet demeanor. He stepped into the kitchen, greeted Nora politely, and asked if I wanted help trimming the hedge later. His voice carried an ease that reminded me how different simple kindness felt from the careful politeness Mason performed. Clyde asked about my sleep, about whether Mercy was adjusting well, about whether the house still felt too quiet. His presence softened something in me. I could breathe around him. Nora left shortly after he arrived, her arms full of folders she said she would help sort through later. When the door closed, Clyde lowered his voice and asked if everything was all right. I hesitated, not knowing how much to reveal. Instead, I told him the garden still made me uneasy. He nodded as if he understood more than I had said. Mason stopped by that evening with a toolbox. He said he needed to fix a loose hinge on the back door before it became a nuisance. His tone was clipped, polite but sharp. He barely looked at me when he stepped inside, heading straight to the back of the house. Mercy, still nursing her wounds from her escape, stiffened the moment she saw him. Her ears shot back, her body rigid, a low growl rumbling from her chest. Mason muttered something under his breath about unpredictable animals. He told me Mercy's reaction proved why the vet had been right to put her down. His voice held a cold certainty that felt off, as if he was blaming me for the dog's distrust. When he finished tightening the hinge, he looked around the kitchen and made a comment about how the house needed a deeper clean. He said that Nora worried about me living alone, that chaos could creep in if I was not careful. The words were wrapped in concern, but the tone was closer to reprimand. I felt small under his gaze, but something inside me pushed back. Mercy growled again, louder this time, and Mason stepped away quickly, muttering that the dog needed proper discipline. After he left, I knelt beside Mercy and ran my hand along her back. Her tension eased as she pressed her head into my lap. At that moment, I realized something important. Mercy never reacted that way to anyone except Mason. Not to Nora, not to Clyde, not to the mail carrier or the delivery drivers. Only Mason. And the fear in her body was not confusion. It was recognition. That night, I placed Elias's handkerchief beneath my pillow and whispered a truth I had been avoiding. There was something wrong in my house, something deeper than grief, and Mercy knew it long before I did. In the days that followed, the memory of Mercy throwing herself between me and Mason settled in my mind more heavily than I expected. It replayed at odd moments, like when I folded laundry or rinsed a cup in the sink, as if my thoughts refused to let the image fade. Mercy had always been gentle with me, almost tender, but that night she had positioned herself like a shield, her body firm and braced, her eyes locked on Mason with unwavering intensity. It stirred something inside me, something Elias had planted long before he left this world. During the final week of his life, Elias held my hand as if memorizing the shape of it. I remember him whispering, his voice so thin it barely lifted off his lips. He said, "I will never leave you alone, Quinn. Not truly." At the time, I thought it was simply the kind of promise a loving husband makes when his time is running out. But once Mercy returned from the dead, so to speak, and once I saw the way she positioned herself whenever Mason entered the room, Elias's words took on a different weight. It felt less like comfort and more like a message I had not yet learned how to read. 2 afternoons later, as I was sweeping the porch, I saw Dr. Alma Reese walking up the driveway with her slow, careful steps. Alma had been a veterinarian for decades before retiring, and she had known Elias since they were both young. She carried a small paper bag with her, the kind used to hold medication or dried treats. I invited her inside, grateful for a familiar face. Mercy perked up the moment she saw Alma, tail wagging, body alert but relaxed. Alma knelt to check the healing wounds along her legs. The gentleness in her movements made my throat tighten. She asked if I had been giving Mercy the antibiotics she left in my mailbox. I told her I had, though I never understood how she knew Mercy was alive. Her eyes softened as she stood. "Quinn," she said, "Elias came to see me 3 months before he passed. He asked me to help him find a dog. Not just any dog, a trained one. One with instincts for protection, especially around vulnerable people. He said he wanted you to have someone who could sense danger even when you could not." My breath caught. I sat down slowly, the wooden kitchen chair creaking under my weight. I asked why Elias never told me. Alma shook her head in that calm way she always had. "He did not want to worry you," she said, "but he suspected something was off with Mason. He did not know what, but he felt it." The words hit me with a chill that sank straight into my bones. Elias, even in his weakness, had sensed something I had brushed aside for years. As Alma spoke, Mercy pushed herself between my chair and the doorway, positioning her body so that if anyone entered, she would be the first line of defense. It was subtle, but unmistakably deliberate. Alma noticed it too. "That dog was trained well," she murmured. "She's not anxious. She's watching." The realization pressed heavily on my chest. Mercy was not just loyal. She was responding to something real, something I had been trying not to acknowledge. That evening, Mason came by again, this time complaining that Mercy's presence made the house feel tense. He said large dogs were unpredictable, and that with my age, it was unsafe for me to be alone with her. He used the word liability, as if Mercy were an accident waiting to happen rather than a breathing creature Elias chose specifically for me. When Mercy stepped in front of me again, Mason flinched. Only for a second, but I saw it. An instinctive recoil. Fear, not irritation. He tried to hide it by straightening his shoulders and accusing the dog of being aggressive. He said any reasonable vet would put her down for safety. The way he said safety made my skin crawl. I wanted to challenge him, to ask why he cared so much about a dog he claimed not to trust. But the words stayed locked in my throat. Old habits die slowly. For decades I had kept peace by swallowing discomfort before it reached my lips. After Mason left, Mercy stayed close to me, her body warm against my leg. I stroked her fur and let my thoughts unravel. Alma's revelation lingered like a quiet ache. Elias had foreseen something. He had placed Mercy into my life on purpose. And now, Mercy was sounding an alarm I could no longer ignore. Still, one question kept rising, fragile and painful. If Elias trusted Mercy to protect me, did that mean he sensed danger not only from Mason, but from the choices Nora made under his influence? And if that was true, did I have the right to doubt my own daughter? The conflict twisted inside me. A mother's heart clings to her child, even when truth pulls in the opposite direction. But as Mercy rested her head on my knee, steady and vigilant, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet acceptance. Maybe love sometimes means questioning what feels safest to believe. Looking back, the first signs of unease appeared on the day Mason offered to build the memorial garden for Elias. It was only 2 months after the funeral, a time when grief still clung to my skin like humidity in late summer. Nora sat quiet on the couch, exhausted from holding herself together. Mason, on the other hand, stood tall in the center of the living room with a confidence that felt almost rehearsed. He said he wanted to honor Elias properly, said a man like him deserved a beautiful place in the backyard where we could sit and remember him. His tone was warm, almost sentimental, but something about the eagerness in his eyes made me hesitate. I thanked him for the offer, though a part of me wondered why he was the one to bring it up. Elias and Mason never shared more than polite conversations. Elias used to say Mason understood efficiency better than emotion. Yet suddenly, Mason was sketching layouts, discussing stone types, and insisting on doing all the labor himself. He said it would save money and make the tribute more personal. At first, I appreciated the gesture. It felt generous, thoughtful, even healing during a time when everywhere I turned reminded me of loss. But then the digging started. Mason arrived early each morning with gloves and tools, barely pausing to greet me. He marked a large rectangular area near the back fence and began removing layer after layer of soil. I remember standing at the kitchen window watching him, wondering why the garden needed to be so deep. Most memorial beds required simple leveling, not trenches. But Mason insisted he had a vision. He said the foundation had to be stable. He said the soil needed to be replaced. Every explanation arrived too quickly, as if he had rehearsed answers before I even asked. Mercy, still adjusting to life without Elias, followed Mason everywhere at first. She sniffed at the growing hole, paced along the edges, and barked whenever Mason stepped into the trench. Instead of laughing it off, Mason snapped at her. He shooed her away with sharp hand motions, muttering about dogs getting underfoot. He told Nora to keep Mercy inside when he worked. His voice held a warning that made me stiffen. One afternoon, Nora brought Mason a glass of water. The sun was harsh that day, and sweat dripped down his temples. When Nora leaned over to wipe some dirt off his collar, her sleeve shifted, revealing a faint purple mark along her upper arm. It disappeared as quickly as it appeared when she pulled her sleeve down, but the sight settled heavily in my chest. I had seen enough bruises in hospitals to know the shape of one caused by fingers, not accidents. When I asked if she was all right, she gave me a smile too bright for her tired eyes. She said she had bumped into a cabinet while cleaning. She said it lightly, but her voice trembled. Mercy growled softly from the doorway. As the days passed, Mason's control over the project tightened. He insisted on choosing every plant, every stone, every placement. He said Elias would have wanted order and structure. The irony made my throat tighten. Elias had always preferred wildflowers. He liked things growing freely. Yet Mason built a perfect, symmetrical space that felt more like a monument to precision than a resting place for the man I loved. What unsettled me most was how protective he became of the soil itself. He did not allow anyone near it, not Nora, not me, not Mercy. When Clyde came over to help me fix a fence panel, Mason stepped between him and the garden with a stiffness that bordered on territory. Clyde raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Later, when we were alone, he told me Mason's behavior seemed odd for a memorial project. He said real kindness did not need to be performed so loudly. His words lingered long after he left. A week later, something even stranger happened. Clyde knocked on my door close to midnight. He apologized for the late hour, then asked if Mason was supposed to be working in the yard that late. Confused, I followed him to his porch. From there, we had a clear view of my backyard. Under the dim glow of a single flashlight, Mason was kneeling in the garden again. His movements were fast, frantic, as if he was burying something instead of planting. I watched him dig, pause, look around, then cover the soil quickly. When he finally stood, he wiped his hands on his jeans and slipped out through the side gate, glancing back toward the house. My stomach tightened. I did not sleep that night. Every creak of the house sounded like a warning. The next morning, Mason arrived with fresh bags of soil and acted as if nothing unusual had happened. When I asked if he had been working late, he smiled too warmly and said he was just making adjustments to the layout. His explanation was smooth, practiced. Mercy barked at him again, her hackles raised. He glared at her, then turned to me with a tone that felt like a lecture. He said large dogs could be unpredictable. He said it would be safer for everyone if she stayed away from the garden. I nodded, but inside me something shifted. I had learned over the years that sometimes generosity becomes a mask. Sometimes the kindest gesture holds a shadow behind it. And as I watched Mason smooth the soil with a precision that felt more like concealment than care, a quiet question surfaced in my mind. When a person insists on being overly helpful, overly involved, overly perfect, are they protecting you or protecting themselves? I did not know the answer yet, but Mercy seemed to. The morning Mercy disappeared began like any other, quiet and still, with the soft gray light stretching slowly across the kitchen tiles. I called her name the way I always did before opening the back door. Usually she came trotting toward me, ears perked, ready for breakfast. That day, there was only silence. I stepped outside and scanned the yard, my heart beating faster with each empty corner I saw. The gate was shut. The fence was intact. There was no sign of her anywhere. Panic rose in my chest like a wave hitting a seawall. I walked the perimeter of the yard twice, calling her name louder each time. I checked the shed, the side bushes, even the small crawl space under the porch where she sometimes hid during thunderstorms. Nothing. It felt as if she had vanished into thin air. My hands shook as I dialed Nora. When she answered, her voice was already tight, as if she had been waiting for my call. She told me to sit down. I refused. She repeated it, more firmly this time. And suddenly, I felt like a child again, waiting for an adult to break something terrible to me. "Mom," she finally said, "Mercy bit Mason last night. We had to take her to the emergency vet. They said she was dangerous. They had to put her down." For several seconds, my breathing simply stopped. The words felt wrong, foreign, as if she were reading lines from a script someone else had written for her. I asked why she had not called me, why she had not brought Mercy home so I could say goodbye. Nora apologized, but her apology felt thin, stretched like fabric pulled too hard. She said everything happened so fast. She said she trusted the vet. She said she and Mason had agreed it was for my safety. That phrase again, for my safety. Before I could gather enough air to ask more questions, Nora told me she and Mason would stop by later. She hung up before I could respond. The house felt unbearably silent after the call. The air seemed thicker, harder to breathe. I sank into Elias's old recliner and stared at the spot where Mercy usually lay at my feet. Grief swept through me so sharply that I had to grip the armrests just to stay upright. Losing her so abruptly felt like losing Elias all over again, as if someone had torn the last thread connecting me to the comfort he left behind. An hour later, Nora returned with a small metal urn. She placed it gently on the coffee table, her hands trembling. She said the vet prepared it quickly so I would not have to wait. I looked at the urn, small and cold, and something inside me shifted. It was not rage, not even disbelief. It was a silence so heavy that it filled the entire room. Nora kept talking, explaining, justifying, trying to fill the space with logic. Mason stood near the doorway, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He avoided my eyes. I noticed the small bandage on his forearm. He made a point of adjusting it, as if reminding me what Mercy had allegedly done. But as I watched him fidget, something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking down, instead of shouting or demanding answers, I went still, completely still. My body quieted, my thoughts quieted, my voice quieted. I simply nodded, slowly, as if accepting something neither of them actually said. And my silence unsettled Mason more than any outburst possibly could. He kept glancing at me, expecting tears, maybe begging, maybe accusations. Instead, he found nothing but a steady, unreadable calm. I could see confusion flicker in his eyes, followed by something else. Unease. Maybe even fear. There is a kind of power hidden in silence, especially the silence of a woman who has endured more than people realize. I felt it rising gently, like a tide reaching the shore. It did not roar. It did not shake the walls, but it changed the air in the room. Nora reached for my hand, but I withdrew it gently, telling her I needed a moment alone. She looked wounded, but she nodded. Mason placed the urn closer to me as if presenting evidence. When I did not react, he cleared his throat and said something about safety again. I did not respond. When they finally left, closing the door behind them, I sat back down and let the truth settle over me like dust on an untouched shelf. The pain of old age does not shout. It does not burst out of you like the grief of youth. It lingers in the bones, in the breath, in the quiet corners of the day. It has no scream, only echoes. And as I stared at that cold metal urn, I felt something shift deep in those echoes. A ripple, a warning, a confirmation that what I had been sensing about Mason was no longer just suspicion. It was truth scratching at the surface, begging to be seen. Mercy was gone, but the silence she left behind spoke louder than anything Mason or Nora could explain. The night Mercy returned was the first night in weeks that I had managed to fall asleep before midnight. Grief drains the body in strange ways. It exhausts you but refuses to let you rest. That evening, however, silence wrapped around the house gently, almost kindly, and I let myself drift. The urn sat on the dresser like a cold witness, and every time I glanced at it, a dull ache spread through my chest. Yet even that ache eventually softened into a heavy, dreamless sleep. I woke to a noise, a low scratching against the back door. At first I thought it was a branch brushing against the siding. Then I heard it again, sharper this time, followed by a faint whine. My heart lurched. I sat up and listened. The clock on the bedside table read 2 a.m. The scratching grew louder, frantic, desperate. Something inside me recognized it before my mind caught up. I threw on a robe and hurried down the hallway. When I opened the back door, the porch light flickered, and in that trembling glow, I saw her, Mercy, alive, trembling, covered in dirt and dried blood. The sight nearly took my breath away. She staggered toward me, her tail lifting weakly, as if she feared I might disappear before she reached me. I knelt on the porch and wrapped my arms around her, feeling every sharp ridge of her ribs. She pressed her head against my chest, whimpering like a child who had been left out in the cold. My first instinct was to bring her inside, tend to her wounds, give her water. But Mercy pulled away, turning toward the yard. She glanced back at me, then bolted down the steps, ignoring her limp. She headed straight for the memorial garden. It was as if no time had passed, as if she had never been taken, never pronounced dead, never turned into ashes in a cold metal urn. I followed her across the yard. The grass was damp with night dew, and the air carried a sharp chill. Mercy reached the rose bush Mason planted and began digging with violent urgency. Clumps of soil flew in every direction. Her movements were frantic but purposeful. It was the same spot I had seen Mason dig under the flashlight beam. My heart hammered against my ribs as I knelt beside her. I whispered her name, my hands trembling as I tried to calm her, but she kept digging. Something deep inside me understood that stopping her would be a mistake, so I dug with her. My fingers sank into the cold dirt, scraping against roots, stones, and softened earth. The smell of soil filled my lungs, grounding me in the moment. Then my hand hit something hard, metal. Mercy froze, her breathing heavy, and nudged the spot with her nose. I brushed the soil away until the full corner of a box appeared. The metal was dull and old, edges rusted, as if it had been buried long before the garden existed. My pulse quickened. I dug faster until the box loosened enough for me to lift it. It was heavier than I expected, weighted with something that shifted inside. Mercy pressed her body against my leg, watching with sharp, worried eyes. For a moment, I considered opening it. The truth felt only an inch away, but something in the cold night air told me the moment was not right. My hands were shaking too much. My breath was uneven. Mercy was injured. And most of all, whatever waited inside that box required steadiness, not panic, so I rested it gently on the ground beside me. Slow pivot. Let the world breathe before it breaks open. I stroked Mercy's back, whispering to her the way I used to whisper to Elias when pain kept him awake. She leaned into my touch and let out a long exhale. The night held its breath with us, suspended in a kind of fragile stillness. As I stood with the box in my hands, something made me turn toward the house. A faint glow spilled from the second-floor window. Someone was standing there, a silhouette framed against the curtain. When the curtain shifted, moonlight caught part of a face. Nora. Her eyes were wide, almost ghostly. Her hand covered her mouth as she stared down at us. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. I could not tell if she had known, suspected, or feared what Mercy would uncover. But the look on her face was unmistakable. Shock, fear, recognition. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment, dreading its arrival. She stepped back quickly, the curtain falling shut. I held the box closer, my fingers curling around the cold metal. Mercy growled low under her breath, her eyes fixed on the dark window. The night air tightened around us, thick with truths rising from the soil. Not every silence is peace. Some silences are warnings. I whispered the words to myself, feeling them settle into my bones like a second heartbeat. Elias had tried to tell me. Mercy had risked everything to show me, and now even Nora's pale face at the window confirmed what I had been too scared to see. The truth was no longer buried. It was in my hands, and the silence surrounding my family was not a shield. It was a crack, widening with every breath. I brought the metal box inside with hands that would not stop trembling. Mercy followed closely behind me, limping but determined, as if she feared the box might vanish if she looked away. I placed it on the kitchen table, wiped the dirt from its surface, and stared at it for several minutes. The house was silent, except for Mercy's uneven breathing. Every part of me wanted to know what was inside, yet a quiet voice urged caution. Opening it meant confronting truths that could not be undone. Still, the weight of the box felt like a heartbeat against my palms, and eventually I reached for the latch. It resisted at first, stiff from rust and years underground. When it finally gave, a sharp metallic snap echoed through the kitchen. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside were stacks of papers bound with brittle rubber bands, a small black flash drive, and several folded envelopes with Nora's name written on them in a handwriting that was not hers. My stomach tightened. The smell of old paper drifted out, mixed with something faintly chemical, like dried ink and dust. I picked up the first stack and flipped through the page, and they were contracts. Loan agreements, high interest, high risk, the kind of debt that crushed people. Mason's signature appeared again and again, but what made my hands go cold was the borrower's name, Nora Harper Doyle. Every document listed her as responsible for the debt. Every signature line carried her name, yet the signatures did not match her handwriting. They were smooth, confident strokes meant to imitate her style, but lacking her natural curve. My breath caught. Mason had forged her name. Beneath the loans were permits and building inspection records from his construction projects. Several were stamped with red ink that read, "Violations unresolved." Others included complaints from homeowners, reports of unsafe materials, unfinished electrical work, and structural fraud. Attached to many of them were letters demanding payment or threatening legal action. And just like the loan papers, Mason had listed Nora as the guarantor, her credit, her identity, her future. I sifted deeper into the box and found security invoices from a private company. Large payments made under my account number, my account, the one Elias and I built over 40 years ago, the one meant to sustain me through old age. I felt something sharp twist inside me. Mason had used my name, too, forging my signature with the same arrogant confidence he used on Nora's documents. Each paper revealed another layer of deceit, another lie, another theft. Suddenly, the garden made sense. The late-night digging, the way he snapped at Mercy, the sudden generosity, the insistence on doing everything himself. He had not been honoring Elias. He had been burying his crimes, hiding them in the one place he believed no one would disturb, a memorial garden, a shield of sentiment designed to keep curious eyes away. But Mercy had found it. She had gone straight for the truth, guided by whatever training Elias had insisted Alma give her. That realization pierced through me with painful clarity. Elias had not chosen Mercy randomly. He had not been sentimental or irrational. He had known something, maybe not the details, but enough to sense danger, enough to prepare a safeguard long before I understood what was happening. Unspoken truth rose between the papers like a quiet whisper. Elias had met with Alma in secret. He had known he might not survive long enough to protect me, so he had asked Mercy to do what he no longer could, and Mercy had done exactly that. I picked up one of the envelopes with Nora's name. Inside were copies of email threads between Mason and debt collectors. Some showed threats from lenders. Others showed Mason shifting blame, redirecting lawsuits, telling them to pursue Nora since the paperwork listed her as the responsible party. The thought of my daughter, my only child, bearing the weight of debts she had never agreed to broke something inside me. My fingers tightened around the envelope until the paper crinkled. I felt anger, fear, grief, and disbelief collide all at once. I had always known something about Mason, too polished, too helpful, too certain. But I had trained myself to dismiss those instincts, telling myself that suspicion was unkind, that doubt was unmotherly, that Nora deserved stability and I should not interfere. Now I realized my silence had not been kind. It had been granted. Mercy nudged my leg softly, sensing the tremor in my hands. I looked down at her, remembering how she had barked, growled, and positioned herself every time Mason entered the house. She had been trying to warn me long before I was ready to listen. I gathered the documents into neat piles. My breath steadied. The weight of the box no longer felt like dread. It felt like clarity, like the beginning of a path I never expected to walk. Elias had started this journey for me. Mercy had guided me back to it, and now it was my turn to follow the truth wherever it led. For the first time since Elias's death, the silence in my house felt different, not empty, not heavy, revealing. Not every silence is peace. Some silences are invitations to finally see. By the time dawn crept over the rooftops, I had hardly slept. The documents from the metal box lay sorted into careful stacks across the dining table. Every page seemed to pulse with betrayal. My hands ached from gripping the papers for so long, but my heart ached even more from everything I had been blind to. Mercy slept curled against my feet, exhausted from the night's battle, her breathing uneven but steady. She had done her part. Now it was my turn to understand the truth she had uncovered. I called Alma as soon as the sun rose. She arrived within the hour, wearing a light jacket and carrying the quiet steadiness she'd always had. When she stepped into the kitchen and saw the papers spread out, her eyes softened with something like regret, or maybe recognition. I asked her to sit. She did. And then I asked the question that had been tightening in my chest since the moment I lifted the lid of that metal box. Did Elias know? Alma did not answer immediately. She looked at Mercy instead, running her fingers along the dog's spine with a tenderness that mirrored Elias's own. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but her words landed like weight on my chest. Elias suspected, she said. Not everything. Not the loans or forged signatures. But he sensed something was wrong. There were small things. The way Mason spoke about money. The way he corrected Nora in front of others. The way he asked questions about your accounts, your property, your health. Elias noticed all of it. He came to me because he did not want to alarm you until he understood more. My breath caught. I asked why. He never told me. Alma sighed, a long, tired sound. He was sick, Quinn. He did not want to add fear to your grief. He knew his time was limited. He wanted to leave you something that could protect you when he no longer could. Her words made my throat tighten. I closed my eyes, remembering Elias's face in those final days, the quiet urgency beneath his softness, the way he squeezed my hand even when he was too weak to speak. I remembered him asking me to trust my instincts. I remembered him saying he would not leave me alone. Alma reached into her bag and pulled out a worn notebook. She opened it to a page with Elias's handwriting. He had written a list of traits he wanted in a dog. Calm, observant, trained to defend without aggression, loyal to one person above all. Alma told me he had asked her to help him find a dog with specialized training, a dog used in therapy and protective work for vulnerable adults. He said, Alma continued, that when he was gone, Mercy would see things you might not. He believed she would sense danger before you could. He said, when I am not here, Mercy will know what Quinn cannot yet see. A shiver ran through me. Elias had planned this. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the protection. He had prepared for something I had refused to acknowledge. He had trusted Mercy to do what he feared he would not live to do. And Mercy had done it. She had dug through lies, through soil, through danger itself. I looked at Mercy lying beside Alma's feet. She lifted her head, meeting my gaze with those deep, steady eyes. She was not just a companion. She was a message, a testament, a living safeguard, a living will, a living promise. Alma leaned forward, her voice lowering. Mercy was trained to position herself between vulnerable individuals and potential threats. That is why she blocked Mason. That is why she barked when he came near. She was not being aggressive. She was alerting you. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. Everything made sense now. The growls, the tension, the instinctive protection. Mercy had been warning me long before I had the courage to ask why. I opened the notebook to another page. A sentence was written in Elias's slow, slanted handwriting. It was simple, but it felt like he was speaking directly into the quiet of the room. When I am gone, she will guard what you cannot see. My breath became shaky. For months, I had thought Elias left me with only memories and a fragile handkerchief. But he had left me something far stronger. He had left me foresight. I asked Alma when Elias had visited her last. She said it was only 6 days before he went into the hospital for the final time. He had been pale, weak, but determined. He brought her a sealed envelope and asked her to give it to me if anything ever felt wrong. My eyes widened. I asked where the envelope was. Alma touched her jacket pocket. She had carried it all this time, unsure when the right moment would come. Last night, she said, When she saw your message, I knew the moment had arrived. She handed me the envelope. My fingers shook as I tore it open. Inside was a short note written in the same trembling handwriting as before. It said, "Quinn, if Mercy leads you somewhere, follow her. Trust her. She carries my last promise to you." I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling the weight of Elias's foresight, his love, his quiet determination to protect me even as his own life faded. When I looked at Mercy again, tears blurred my vision. She was not simply a dog. She was not even simply protected. She was his final will, his final act of love, his safeguard for the life he feared I would face alone. Mercy was his living testament, his living truth, his living inheritance. At that moment, I understood something with clarity sharp enough to steady me. Mercy was not just a companion. She was a living will Elias left behind, and she had delivered her message. The morning after Alma left, something inside me shifted in a way that even I could feel physically, like a knot loosening in my chest. I did not confront anyone. I did not shout or accuse or even ask a single question. I simply let silence settle around me like a second skin. It was not the silence of fear anymore. It was my intention, purpose, awareness. And from the moment Mason stepped into my house that afternoon, I could tell he felt the difference. He came through the back door with the same confident stride he always carried, talking loudly, filling the air with explanations no one had asked for. He said the contractor working on his latest project had messed up the foundation. He said Nora had misplaced an important invoice again. He said the world was full of incompetence and that he was tired of fixing problems that should have been handled by others. His voice bounced around the kitchen, sharp and self-assured. I said nothing. For the first time, I realized how much he relied on my reactions, on my nods, on my attempts to soothe tension. When I did not offer any of those things, his tone faltered. He looked at me longer than usual, as if trying to read something that was no longer available to him. Mercy lay at my feet, her eyes tracking his every movement, her body still. Mason cleared his throat. He asked if I was feeling all right. I nodded once. He waited for more. I did not offer it. The power in the room changed, though neither of us acknowledged it. That evening, Clyde stopped by to return a gardening tool he had borrowed. He stood with me on the porch, watching Mercy stretch under the fading sunlight. His voice was gentle when he spoke. "You know, Quinn, I have lived long enough to trust the eyes of a good dog more than the words of most people. The truth is usually there if you pay attention." His statement was simple, but it tightened something in my chest. Clyde was not prying. He was not assuming. He was offering a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw the truth I had been avoiding for too long. Mercy's instincts were not accidents. They were warnings I had tried to explain away. And now that I knew what Elias had feared, the pieces began falling into place with an almost painful clarity. I thought about Nora, how she had become quieter over the years, how she avoided eye contact whenever Mason corrected her, how she apologized for everything, even things she had not done. How she wore long sleeves in summer, how she jumped at sudden noises, how she spoke about money only in whispers, as if the topic itself might trigger something. For years, I told myself she was just overwhelmed, tired, distracted. But as I stood with Clyde, Mercy pressing against my leg, I understood something I had not allowed myself to see. My daughter was not simply tired, she was shrinking, folding into herself, trying to survive someone who pretended to love her. And Mason's loudness suddenly sounded a lot like fear, trying to disguise itself as control. After Clyde left, I went inside and found Mason sitting at the kitchen table with his phone. He looked up sharply when he heard my footsteps, as if he expected me to interrupt the quiet with chatter or warmth. When I didn't, a flicker of irritation flashed across his face. He asked if I had decided what to do about Mercy, given her unpredictable behavior. His tone implied that her presence in my home was a mistake I needed to correct. I met his eyes and stayed silent. He shifted in his chair. He repeated the question. My silence held steady. Something darkened in his expression. He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back too hard. He began pacing near the counter, muttering about safety and responsibility. Every word sounded rehearsed, defensive, almost desperate. It was the first time I realized Mason was afraid of something he could not name. Not my anger, not my grief, my silence. As he paced, my thoughts drifted back to the documents from the metal box, the forged signatures, the debts, the manipulation. He had built his life on the assumption that neither Nora nor I would ever question him, that we would stay quiet, that we would trust his explanations over our instincts. For years, I had given him exactly that. Now I wondered whether confronting him immediately would protect Nora or put her at greater risk. Alma's voice echoed in my mind. Elias had trusted Mercy's timing. He had told me to follow her lead, not to rush, not to crumble, to watch, to understand. The conflict in my chest grew heavier. Should I reveal everything now and expose Mason's lies? Or should I wait, gather more clarity, and choose a moment when Nora would be safe enough to listen, safe enough to believe, safe enough to break free? Not every silence is peace. Some silences are strategy. Standing in the kitchen, watching Mason unravel under the weight of a calm he could not manipulate, I understood something profound. My silence was no longer his advantage, it was mine. The next morning, I woke with a strange clarity. It was not anger or fear. It was intention, steady and quiet, like the soft pulse of something waking up inside me. I made coffee, fed Mercy, and stood at the kitchen window watching the garden Mason had built. The soil he had smoothed so carefully now looked unsettled in the early light, disturbed by the truth Mercy pulled to the surface. My eyes traced the neat lines of the flower beds, the perfectly aligned stones, the symmetry he had been so proud of. Now it felt like a disguise more than a tribute. If Mason had buried something there once, he would return it. The only question was how to make him show himself. By late afternoon, Nora and Mason arrived. Nora looked worn, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. Mason walked in with the same stiff confidence he always carried, but I saw the tension hiding under his movements. He scanned the room as if expecting something to be out of place. Mercy stayed at my side, quiet but alert. I waited until they sat down before speaking. I kept my voice even, calm, almost casual. I told them I had been thinking about the garden and that I was considering expanding it. I said I wanted to replant some areas and dig into the soil to loosen it, maybe add a fountain or a small stone path. I mentioned it the way older women talk about knitting or repainting a room. Soft, harmless. Mason frozen. He blinked at me as if he had misheard. Then he asked sharply why I would do that. His voice had an edge, thin and sharp like a blade hidden in fabric. I repeated my plan gently, saying the garden felt too cramped and that digging deeper might help certain plants grow. The shift in him was immediate. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw tightened. He leaned forward, speaking too quickly, insisting the garden was perfect as it was. He said it would be dangerous for someone my age to handle heavy soil. He said the ground was stable now and should not be disturbed. Every reason came out too fast, too forceful, like someone trying to plug leaks in a sinking boat. Nora glanced at him, confused. She tried to soften the moment by asking me where I wanted to expand the flower beds. When I gestured toward the rose bush, the exact place Mercy had dug up the box, Mason's reaction was almost violent. He slammed his palm on the table before catching himself. The sound echoed through the room. Nora flinched. Mercy growled, low and steady. Mason forced a laugh, pretending the gesture had been harmless frustration, but his eyes betrayed him. He insisted again that the soil near the roses was delicate and should not be touched. His voice grew louder with each explanation. He leaned toward me as if trying to intimidate me into dropping the idea. I stayed completely silent. My stillness rattled him more than any confrontation would have. Nora looked at me, then at him. Doubt began to flicker across her face, soft at first, then sharper. She asked him why he cared so much about a simple gardening project. He snapped back at her, telling her she did not understand landscaping and that I was being impulsive. Nora's lips pressed together, and something like recognition passed through her eyes. I could see her putting pieces together in real time. The late nights, the bruises, the constant explanations, the way he always positioned himself between her and the truth. I repeated gently that I had made up my mind. Mason stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. He said he needed air and headed toward the door. Zion of panic flickered in his movements, sharp and uneven. As soon as he stepped outside, Mercy launched to her feet. Her bark exploded into the quiet room, deep, protective, unyielding. It was not a frightened bark. It was a warning. Mason recoiled, just for a second. But I saw it. Nora saw it. Mercy saw it. He muttered something under his breath and hurried toward the gate, his steps fast and uneven. When the door closed behind him, Nora sank into the chair as if her legs could no longer carry her. She looked at me with a question forming on her lips, one she seemed scared to ask. I reached over and placed my hand on hers. I did not tell her anything yet. Not about the box, not about the papers, not about Elias's fear. The truth was too heavy to drop without care. And sometimes the greatest protection comes from waiting for the right moment, not rushing into the wrong one. Slow pivot. Let him reveal himself. Let the truth breathe. As the room settled into silence, Mercy curled at my feet again, her eyes still fixed on the door where Mason had disappeared. Not every silence is peace. Some silences are preparation, and mine had just begun. The night Mason returned, the air felt strange long before I understood why. Mercy sensed it first. She lifted her head from the foot of my bed and stared toward the back of the house, ears tense, body rigid. It was 2 a.m, the same hour she had come home wounded. I sat up slowly, listening. At first there was only silence, thick and unmoving. Then I heard it, a faint click. Metal against metal, the sound of someone working a lock. My breath steadied instead of speeding. Something in me had been waiting for this moment. I slipped on my robe and stepped quietly through the hallway, Mercy close beside me. Moonlight spilled across the living room floor, casting long shadows that stretched toward the back door. Another sound followed, soft but unmistakable. The latch of the side gate. Someone was in my yard. I moved to the back porch, keeping the lights off. Through the window, I saw a dark figure crouched near the memorial garden. Mason. His movements were frantic, sharp, driven by a fear he could no longer hide. He dug at the soil, not with the precision he once used, but with desperation, looking for the box he believed was still there. He had no idea I had already opened it, no idea I had seen every paper he tried to bury, no idea that my silence had shifted from confusion to strategy. I stepped onto the porch and reached for the switch beside the door. With a single motion, the entire yard flooded with white light. Mason frozen, his head jerked up, eyes wide, face washed pale under the sudden brightness. Dirt clung to his hands and sleeves. His chest rose and fell in fast, uneven breaths. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I simply stood there, in my robe, my hair uncombed, Mercy pressed against my leg, watching him. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I did not ask what he was doing at 2 a.m, digging through my yard like a man searching for evidence of his own guilt. I just looked at him, and that was enough. He stumbled backward, muttering something about checking the soil integrity, about making improvements to the garden, about helping me. Every sentence contradicted the next. His voice cracked under the weight of his lies. He wiped his hands against his jeans, leaving streaks of dirt across the fabric. Then he made a mistake. He lunged toward the porch steps as if to come closer, as if to reclaim control the way he always had with words and posture. Mercy stepped forward instantly, her growl low and steady. Mason stopped. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. Not fear of the dog, fear of exposure. As he backed away, I heard footsteps behind the fence. Clyde appeared at the side gate, half-dressed, holding a flashlight. He had been outside watering his lemon tree when he saw a man jump my fence. When he recognized Mason, he did not hesitate. He pulled out his phone and called the police right there in front of us. He said, loud enough for Mason to hear, that someone was trespassing and attempting to break into a property that was not his. His voice was steady, calm, and absolute. Mason's face tightened with panic. He tried to argue. claiming he was helping with repairs, but Clyde cut him off with a single sentence spoken firmly. "You were breaking a lock, Mason. I saw you." Everything unraveled from there. The police arrived within minutes. Flashing lights painted the yard in red and blue. Mercy stayed beside me, quiet but alert, while two officers questioned Mason. His explanations grew more frantic. He contradicted himself repeatedly. When they asked why he had tools for prying buried objects out of the ground, he had no answer. I did not have to intervene. I simply handed the officers the documents I had found, the forged loans, the fraudulent permits, the records of security bills paid from my account. They read each page carefully, their expressions hardening. Mason's face was drained of color. When they asked Nora if she recognized any of the signatures, she shook her head, tears filling her eyes. She whispered that she never signed a single document. Not one. Hearing her say it out loud felt like air rushing into lungs that had been tight for years. The officers placed Mason in handcuffs. He looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and fury, as if shocked that I had not shielded him the way I once shielded others during my years as a nurse. But this time, I was not the one who needed saving. I did not speak. I did not move toward him. I stood exactly where I was, illuminated by the porch light, Mercy's warm weight pressed against my leg, Clyde standing nearby as witness. Power reversal does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it arrives with stillness. And that night, standing on my own porch, watching the man who hurt my daughter and stole from my family finally face consequences, I understood something fully. I had not needed to fight him. I only needed to stand in the right place, at the right moment, and let the truth catch up to him. After the police car pulled away with Mason in the back seat, the yard fell into a silence so heavy it felt almost physical. The flashing lights faded down the street, and the quiet returned in waves, settling back into the spaces his presence once filled. Nora stood in the middle of the kitchen, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the stack of documents on the table as if they were something alive and dangerous. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, as if her ribs could barely keep up with the truth pressing against them. She reached for one paper, her fingers trembling. It was a loan agreement, her name printed neatly at the top, a signature that looked like hers but not quite, too controlled, too perfect, too unlike her natural handwriting that always tilted slightly to the right. She touched the ink as if it might burn her. "Mom," she whispered, barely audible. "Did he really do all this? Did he really put everything under my name?" I nodded. Not harshly, not triumphantly, just truthfully. It felt like placing a small stone on soft earth, steady and firm. Nora stared at the papers again, her face draining of color. She sank to her knees right there on the kitchen floor. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the collapse of someone whose foundation had been quietly cut away long before she realized she was falling. Mercy walked toward her slowly and pressed her head into Nora's lap. Nora's hands moved instinctively to the dog's fur, but her touch was distant, disconnected, as if her body had reacted before her mind caught up. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "I thought he loved me. I thought he was stressed, tired, trying his best. I thought everything was my fault. Every mistake, every bill, every debt. He told me I was careless. He told me I was forgetful. He told me I ruined everything. I knelt beside her. I did not rush her. I did not touch the papers. I let her sit with the truth that had taken root in front of her." She pressed her palms against her eyes, and for a moment she looked so young, not the 38-year-old woman she had become, but the small girl who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. She looked at me through blurred eyes. Why didn't I see it? Why didn't I leave? Why? Didn't I listen to myself? Her voice broke on the last word. I placed my hand on her back, gentle and steady. Nora leaned forward until her forehead touched my shoulder, and the first sob shook through her body. Then another, and another. Tears she had swallowed for years finally found their way out. She cried without trying to hide it, without shame, without apologizing. It was the first time I had seen her cry freely since she was a teenager. Each tear felt like a thread being pulled loose from the hold Mason had wrapped around her. When her sobs quieted, I cupped her cheek and guided her face toward mine. I spoke softly, but with the certainty only a mother could carry. You were the first hand that ever held mine, Nora. You were the first person who ever needed me. I will not abandon you now. I will not leave you standing in the ruins he built. You are still my child, and I am still your mother." Her lips trembled. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "No." I shook my head. "No apologies. Not from you." The tears returned, softer this time. Healing tears, not wounded ones. We sat on that kitchen floor for a long while, the morning light slowly filling the room. Mercy lay beside us, her warm weight grounding all of us. I realized then that healing does not always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes quietly, in a kitchen where truth has finally been spoken. When Nora's breathing steadied again, I helped her to her feet and poured her a glass of water. She drank it with shaking hands. I could see the exhaustion in her face, but also something else. A flicker. A beginning. I told her we were going to visit someone. I did not explain yet. I did not need to. She followed my lead the way she used to as a child. We drove to Alma's house. Nora stared out the window the entire time, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When Alma opened the door, she took one look at Nora's face and knew exactly why we had come. She ushered us inside without a single question. Nora sat on the couch, and Alma sat across from her posture calm, her gaze steady. She spoke to Nora with the kind of gentle firmness only someone who has spent a lifetime tending to wounded creatures could manage. She explained trauma responses, control, manipulation, the gradual shrinking of a person under the weight of someone else's power. Nora listened, really listened. Every word seemed to land somewhere deep. There was a moment when Alma asked her a question so simple it pierced right through her defenses. "When did you stop recognizing your own voice?" Nora pressed her hand to her mouth as if trying to hold back another wave of emotion. She whispered, "I don't know. I think it happened so slowly I didn't notice." Alma nodded. "That is how these things happen. Quietly, gently, until you forget where you end and someone else begins." Something broke open in Nora then, but not the way she had broken earlier. This time it was released. The beginning of clarity, healing, does not begin with answers. It begins with recognition. When we left Alma's house, Nora squeezed my hand. Not weakly, not like a frightened child, but firmly, with intention, with strength. For the first time in a very long time, I felt hope settle softly in my chest. My daughter was waking up. The weeks after Mason's arrest unfolded more quietly than I expected. No chaos, no shouting, no dramatic confrontations. Just the slow unraveling of tension that had lived in this house for far too long. The silence felt different now. Not heavy, not threatening. It felt like the first deep breath after a long storm, the kind that reaches the bottom of your lungs and reminds you what relief feels like. Nora moved into a small rental 2 blocks away while she sorted through the legal aftermath. She came over daily, sometimes with a stack of papers, sometimes with nothing but the need to sit at my kitchen table and breathe somewhere safe. She attended therapy sessions with Alma's guidance. The lines in her forehead softened, the tightness in her shoulders eased, her voice grew steadier, less apologetic, less afraid of being heard. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, like sunlight creeping across the floor in the early afternoon. Mercy regained her strength too. The wounds on her legs closed, leaving faint scars that would probably never fade completely. She followed me from room to room with her same gentle gait, but now she also followed Nora, as if recognizing that the daughter needed guarding just as much as the mother. When the sun rose, Mercy stretched in the patch of light near the back porch, sighing with a peace so pure that I sometimes stood there just to watch her. If a dog could embody the word safe, she did. One Saturday morning, Nora asked if we could work on the garden together. She spoke softly, but with a kind of determination I had not heard in years. Clyde joined us too, arriving with a shovel slung over his shoulder and a thermos of iced tea. His presence, as always, was steady and grounding. No opinions unless asked, no rush, just the quiet companionship of someone who understands the weight of rebuilding. The garden was still a wound in the yard, its soil unsettled, its symmetry disrupted by the night Mason returned. But it was also a beginning. We decided to reshape it, not as a memorial built from fear and control, but as a place rooted in truth, healing, and memory. While Nora pulled out the old rose bush Mason had planted, I opened the small wooden box where I kept Elias's belongings. The embroidered handkerchief lay folded inside, edges worn from years of use. I held it for a long moment, feeling the familiar softness of the fabric. It carried his initials, E.H., stitched by his mother's hands and carried by his for decades. It still felt like him somehow, gentle and steady. I told Nora I wanted to place it in the soil of the new plant we were adding. She nodded, her eyes shining with a tenderness I had not seen in far too long. She helped me kneel near the fresh potting soil Clyde had brought. Together, we dug a small space in the center. I folded the handkerchief carefully, pressing my palms over it for a moment before placing it beneath the roots of the new flower. It felt like returning something sacred to the earth, not in grief, but in gratitude. Clyde watered the plant, humming a tune so low it sounded like a memory more than a song. Nora pressed her hand against my back, steady and warm. And Mercy lay near my feet, her eyes half closed, soaking up the sunlight as if nothing in the world had ever hurt her. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole, not untouched by what happened, but all in the way a tree grows new rings after surviving a harsh season. Later that evening, Nora and I sat on the porch watching the sky shift into the soft colors of dusk. She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was small. I wrapped my arm around her and felt the truth of everything we had survived settle gently around us. "Mom," she whispered, "do you ever regret being silent for so long?" I took a slow breath before answering. Regret is a complicated thing. It blends with forgiveness. It tangles with hope. It blurs between what we knew, what we feared, and what we tried to protect. But after a moment, I spoke the truth that had been growing quietly inside me. Not every silence is peace, but sometimes silence is how we gather the strength to speak, and sometimes silence is the only bridge between who we were and who we can become. Nora nodded, and for the first time since the nightmare began, I saw something bright in her expression. Not joy exactly, but possibility. As the last of the sunlight faded, Mercy wandered onto the lawn and stretched out under the warm glow still left on the grass. She rolled onto her side, completely relaxed, as if the world finally felt safe again. The sight brought tears to my eyes, soft and grateful. She had fought for us in ways we could never repay. And now she rested, knowing her warning had been heard. I looked at the garden, its soil freshly turned, the new flower rising gently from the earth above Elias's handkerchief. It no longer felt like a place of secrets. It felt like a promise, a beginning. And with that peace settling over the yard, I spoke the words that closed the circle of everything we had lived through. Not every silence is peace, but sometimes silence is the only path that guides us back to ourselves. Then, turning toward the camera, toward whoever might someday hear my story, I let my voice soften into an invitation. Do you think I was wrong for staying silent until the end? If you have lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. I believe your voice might help someone stand up, the same way I finally did.